right, guys. So this lesson is going to be split into two parts. We're going to be talking about reproduction in veterinary medicine. Probably one of my favorite things to discuss ever is reproduction. If I was going to, actually before I decided to not go to vet school, I was going to major in reproduction. That's what I wanted to do. I think it's fascinating. I love it. Reproduction is probably one of my favorite things to talk about, which is probably why I bred cows for almost a year. Loved that job, really enjoyed it. We'll talk more about dairy cattle reproduction during your senior year. We're going to focus on small animal reproduction, and there's a lot of similarities between dogs and cats, and then cows are actually very similar to us ladies. We have very similar cycles and very similar things that happen to our body. Our hormones are similar, but the hormones that happen in the dogs and cats are also similar to similar hormones that we have in humans. So we're going to go through the first part of this lecture, and then that'll be this week's assignment, and then next week we'll finish up our reproduction unit. So if you decided you wanted to study reproduction, this is something you thought you wanted to do, you would be studying theriogenealogy. So that's often referred to as therio. So if you know somebody that is a doctor of, they say that they specialized in therio, they specialized in reproduction. So that's what they specialized in. So it's often shortened to therio, but theriogenealogy is actually what the study of reproduction is. So it's the actual branch of animal science that's concerned with reproduction. It includes the physiology and the pathology of the reproductive systems of both sexes. So it's not just male or female. We look at both sexes. And if you become a doctor of veterinary medicine or you become a licensed technician, you can actually specialize in therio. And there are clinics that you can go work at. Like I know there's one up by Cleveland. One of the doctors I used to work with works up there. She specializes in therio. The clinic that I work at, we do a lot of reproduction, but we are not a specialist. The doctor up by Cleveland is actually board certified, and they are, if you want to become a board certified therio doctor technician, that has to be, you have to be certified through the American Board of Theriogenealogy Doctors. So it's a whole process, but if it's something you want to do, you can do that. And then you can also make a lot more money in that, because then you're worth more. People that, are really good breeders are going to go to these special therio doctors with their dogs or cats or whatever when they're breeding, because obviously they know a lot more. If you have a special problem with your dog, you can go see a therio doctor. So canine reproduction has really come leaps and bounds. I would say probably just even in the last 10 to 15 years. People that are breeders, really good breeders, are really starting to care about the genetics of the dog and how can we make the dog better, and not just like the looks of it, because some of the breeds we've actually ruined. If you go back and look at the history of what maybe like the German Shepherd used to look like, or the Bulldog, what it used to look like, and you look at them now, some of the things we've done to the dogs are pretty horrific. The things that we've selected for, but we're starting to get smarter about what we're selecting for. We're looking into we do a lot of genetic testing, a lot of blood testing and things like that to make sure that we're not perpetuating diseases like von Willebrand's disease, which is a breeding disorder, or hip dysplasia. A lot of you have probably heard about that. So we're starting to try to look into these things and make sure that we're not passing them on. So we're doing a lot of genetic testing. We're doing a lot of interesting things with just the actual mating, where we're worried about sexually transmitted diseases such as brucellosis. So we're doing a lot more contactless breeding. So that would mean that we're doing a lot more artificial insemination, and even things like superovulation, and actually putting in, like, growing eggs in a petri dish and putting babies from our specific favorite female into another female and having that female have those babies. So almost like a surrogate, just like in humans. So this process has become more involved, and it's great because we're really doing our animals a good service and starting to select for really good quality animals, especially in the dog and cat world. But because of this, veterinarians are becoming more involved in the process. We do artificial insemination, the genetic testing, C-sections, evaluation, exams for soundness, so breeding soundness exams, so making sure that the male and the female are both in good quality before we do the breeding process. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the bitch. A bitch is a female dog. You guys probably have heard this at some point. When we refer to female dogs, we're talking about the bitch. That's not a bad word. It's a good word to use. You can ask somebody which bitch are you planning on using. That's not a problem when you're talking about dogs. So that's a term you're more than welcome to use for your female. And so puberty in the bitch is usually around 6 months. However, in your larger breeds, your Great Danes, your Border Bulls, your giant breeds, we're going to be pushing that off more to like the 8 to 10 month mark, even closer to a year sometimes, depending on your breed, which is one of the reasons that we don't suggest breeding those dogs until they're 2, because they're not really mature yet. We highly suggest that people do not breed their females during that first heat because they're not mature enough yet. So we want their bones to finish growing, their bodies to finish growing. So we usually recommend breeding it on the second heat, which is why we say 2 in our large breed dogs and a year old in our smaller breed dogs. Dogs are monoestrus. So mono meaning one and estrus referring to the entire estrus cycle. So they're single estrus. They have one estrus during a breeding season. Now, in your smaller dogs, you might get 2 estrus a year, depending on like your Chihuahuas, your toy breeds, just because sometimes they can do it every 6 months. So you might get 2 in a year, but not always. So we consider them monoestrus, which means during one season they're going to have one heat, unlike cattle or cats are not monoestrus, they're polyestrus. Ladies, we are we're cycling all the time, so we are not monoestrus. So there are 4 stages of the estrus cycle. There is proestrus, so that's where they're starting to come into heat. You're starting to see those signs. In the female dog, you're going to start seeing that vulva swell. You're going to see the blood dripping. Those are all the start of proestrus, and then we go into estrus. And I would like you guys to notice there is a difference here. When we're talking about the estrus cycle, it's OUS. When we're talking about the stage of heat or estrus, it's just US. So there is a difference in the spelling there. That is not, I don't know what happened here. Sorry. We're not trying to be confusing that it's proestrus, estrus, medestrus, diestrus, and then we're going to talk about anestrus, which is hidden underneath my little thing here. But so that is not a typo. That is actually how it's spelt, and that's something that you guys should know the difference between. But estrus is actually our heat. So that's actually where our female is receptive to the male. So people say my dog's in heat. They're probably referring to the whole cycle. When your dog is actually in heat is the only time she's receptive to the male, and that's actually a very short period in this estrus cycle that most people think of. We usually see about a week in proestrus. People say a week in estrus, but the actual receptiveness to the male is probably around 3 to 4 days total, and then maybe a week in medestrus or diestrus, and that's when you're getting that dark brown discharge. They're going out of heat at that point. And when they're in estrus, that frank blood that you see is going to slow down. It's going to be more like a pink discharge instead of frank, that bright red blood that you're going to see during that proestrus. And then anestrus is the period of heat where when the female, you can't even tell, like her vulva's not swollen, she's not receptive to the male, she's not showing signs of heat at all. And that anestrus period is very long. So, proestrus, for sake of argument, we're just going to say 9 days. So we're going to say that we have about 9 days of proestrus, and that's when you, like I said before, you see that vulva swollen. So you're going to see that vulva really puff up, and the reason is because that reproductive tract is relaxing, and it's being ready to accept the male, so it's ready to be able to have the male's penis insert into the vagina. When they are not in estrus, and their vulva is not swollen, that male's penis, if it's engorged, is not going to fit in there. And it is very uncomfortable, which is one of the reasons that they do not want a male around them sometimes when they're not in heat. They're going to have that frank, bloody discharge. She may allow the male to come near her, but if he tries to mount her, she's probably going to spin away from him. She may attack him. She may say, no, thank you. It's because she's not ready yet. When they actually do go into estrus, and they say estrus of about 9 days, I'm going to say it's most likely less than that. But what we're really looking for is ovulation. And ovulation is actually when that follicle on the ovary burst and release the egg. So your ovary looks kind of like a little bean, and it looks like a little bean in the dogs. You guys may have seen them in our spays that we have. And that follicle grows on there, and that follicle contains the egg, and then it bursts and it releases that egg, and it's caught by the infundibulum, and it goes down, basically, for lack of a better term right now, and not to confuse you guys, it goes down like the little tubes that you hear people saying get their tubes tied. Those little tubes, it goes down and then into the uterus. Fertilization actually takes place in the tubes, but you'll learn more about that next year. But that's what happens there. This is during estrus. So ovulation on day 2, we actually want to wait until after she's ovulated to mate. So if she ovulates on day 2, we actually want to breed on day 3, 24 hours later. But now she's willing to accept the male. That discharge is going to go more to like straw or pink colored discharge. So it's going to go from this frank, if you guys are following along in your PowerPoint, it's going to go from this frank blood, you know what I mean, frank blood, that's that bright red blood, to more of a pinky or like a yellowy discharge. And they're going to be swollen like they are here, and they're not going to be near as bloody. And you guys can see here, there's a male smelling the female. She's going to pick that tail up for him. She's going to allow him to mount her, and she's going to accept the male. In most cases, there are some females that do not want to, they don't even like male dogs, they don't like other dogs, or you may have to actually assist with live cover. Then we have medestrus or diestrus. So they're basically the same thing. Just depends on what you want to call it. Some people call it medestrus, some people call it diestrus, but they're the same. This is either, this lasts about 63 days because that's the gestation length of a dog. Gestation is how long they carry the baby. Gestation in women is 9 months. Actually, it's a little more longer than 9 months because most of the time we don't even know we're pregnant until 4 weeks in. So we're actually closer to 10 months is what we're pregnant. But 63 days is how long a dog is pregnant. So that medestrus or diestrus stage lasts about 63 days because they're either having a false pregnancy, so she's either going through the motions and she's not pregnant, or they actually are pregnant. So they're you're going to see mammary development. So their mammary glands are going to get swollen and engorged. They may or may not if they're not pregnant. Some dogs go through really hard false pregnancies, and they'll actually like gather stuffed animals and like lay in their bed with them and nurse stuffed animals, and they don't actually have puppies, but it's just that's that false pregnancy. Their hormones are telling them they're having babies. And you'll see nesting activity like where they bring blankets into maybe an area, and that's all that's all during this diestrus stage. And then either at 63 days or somewhere around there, I mean they can be a little early or a little late, they're going to have their puppies, or they'll go out of that false pregnancy and start kind of going back to normal. But then we go into anestrus, which that's that 5 to 9 months. So that's that period of freeze of sexual activities where they do not have any type of signs of a heat. They're not interested in the male. The males usually aren't interested in them because they don't have those hormones that smell like they're in heat. So anestrus is 5 to 9 months. It's just their reproductive system is dormant. It's sleeping. It doesn't do anything. They just have like basic normal activity. You don't see anything crazy. Smaller dogs, like I said earlier, are going to return to that proestrus stage faster than larger dogs. So like I said, sometimes you might see that in 6 months. So therefore you could see 2 heats a year. So there's a lot of words on here, and I'm going to kind of go through this a little quickly, and I don't want you guys to get super confused. We're going to concentrate more on this during dairy cattle reproduction, but I'm going to point out a couple of things. So this is FSH. That's follicle stimulating hormone. So follicle stimulating hormone is what causes the follicles to grow on the ovaries. So during the anestrus, they're going to start to get those follicles to grow. As those follicles grow, that's going to push them into proestrus because those follicles are going to start producing estrogen. Estrogen's going to go up, and their body's going to say, oh, I like boys now. So that's what we're looking for here. So follicle stimulating hormone causes the follicles to grow. Eventually, the follicle is going to erupt. That follicle erupting releases the egg. That is ovulation, and that's caused by something called luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone causes the follicle to burst. These all come from the pituitary gland. Talk more about that next year. But ovulation occurs right here after luteinizing hormone. And then once ovulation occurs, progesterone shoots up. Progesterone pro-pregnancy. So progesterone, pro-pregnancy. Progesterone helps maintain the pregnancy. So if you ever know anyone that's ever had problems getting pregnant or maintaining a pregnancy, they're probably put on some type of progesterone supplement. Women who are surrogate moms, surrogates are put on progesterone because progesterone helps maintain the pregnancy. It's produced by what's called a corpus luteum, which forms after the follicle bursts. We'll talk more about it next year. But progesterone is produced by the corpus luteum until the fetus can take over and start producing progesterone. The fetus produces progesterone and says, hey, I'm here, please don't get rid of me. So some birth controls, you guys may have heard of progesterone-based birth controls. The idea behind progesterone-based birth controls is that the progesterone levels are in your body are kept high, so that does not allow you to ovulate. Because progesterone levels are high, your body basically thinks it's pregnant all the time, so you don't ovulate, which is why that, ladies, is how it allows you to skip your period. So if you get like the shot or you get like an implant put in, that progesterone level is always high in your body. So that's why sometimes you'll lose your period, because the progesterone levels are high, so your body thinks you're pregnant. So that's how progesterone-based birth control works. But that progesterone is very, very important for maintaining pregnancy, which is why it goes up after estrus, because our body's getting ready to go into metaestrus or diestrus, and we need that progesterone to maintain pregnancy. So this is on the other end. So here's our high progesterone levels. So if our metaestrus, so we're looking at like, metaestrus 1, metaestrus 2, they have it split up. But if that progesterone starts to fall, it's because she's not pregnant, and then her body's going to go ahead and switch into that anestrus, or and not have any pregnancy. However, or that can stay high and that can maintain the pregnancy. So it just kind of depends. And then your estrogen levels are going to just fluctuate a little bit. Then they go down here into anestrus, and all their levels are low down here. You guys notice there's a little boost of prolactin here. Pro meaning yes or for. Lact sounds like lactate, which means to give milk. Prolactin is going to be high here, look like right around day 60, 70, because what's happening? They're having puppies. So we want that prolactin to happen so that they can produce milk for the young. So that's a little bit on hormones. Like I said, don't get too caught up in that. We're going to learn more about that next year, but I just kind of wanted to give you a little crash course so next year when you hear some of these terms, you're like, oh, okay, I remember that. So vaginal cytology. Now, normally we'd be learning to do these in labs, so you guys are going to have to watch some videos. And we watch these videos anyway, but these vaginal cytologies are one of the cheapest, easiest ways to help identify what stage of estrus our female is in. We can also look for infection. So if we have a female that's having some weird colored discharge and she's not in heat and she's maybe out of heat and she's still having some weird discharge, or maybe she had puppies 6 months ago, or let's say even 3 months ago, and she's still getting some weird discharge, she's got maybe a foul odor down there, we can do something like this to see if she has an infection either vaginally or even a uterine infection if it's an open uterine infection. So what we do is we take a cotton tip applicator, or like those long Q-tips that we use, the same ones we use to clean the ears with. And the female, when you look at her from the side, we are actually going to go like up and then in, because her pubic bone or her pelvic bone is there, so we got to go up and then in, and you can reach pretty far in. And now obviously if she's not in heat, that's going to be a lot harder. They do not like it. They dance around. It's not one of their favorite things to have done. But then once you're in there, you're going to kind of swirl it around and roll that Q-tip to collect the cells. And we're looking for the cell walls on the inside of the vagina, because the vagina makes changes as it prepares for the entrance of the male's penis. We roll them onto a slide just like an ear cytology. We do not heat fix. We can blow dry them, but we don't want to actually flame them. You can blow dry them on low to help them dry faster, and then we stain them just like we do for an ear cytology, so same exact stain. So as you guys can see, we're kind of going up. So you actually part the lips of the vulva. We want to go up and then in. And then another one of the reasons, so this is the pubic bone here, the pelvic here. If you get into the wrong spot, you're going to end up in the urethra here and go into the bladder, and they really don't like that. They dance around, they might scream. So that's why you really want to make sure you go up and then in to collect those cells on the inside of the vagina. So then once they're stained, and like I said, we stain them with the triple dip stain just like we do for ears. It's the same exact process. Then we start looking at them. And we look for different things to decide what type or where the female is in her cycle. So in this case, vaginal cytology of proestrus. So proestrus is before estrus. So pre-estrus, so proestrus. The cells have really rounded edges on them. You can see the nucleuses. And you're also going to see red blood cells because she's bleeding. So they're going to have that cytoplasm of the cell is round. And then you can still see a large nucleus. So that's how we know that she's in proestrus. And then the cells are going to start to change a little bit. They're going to start to get more angular, and we're going to start to lose that nucleus. So on these, you can kind of still see the nucleus, but see how these are really starting to look kind of like cracked corn or something that's been crushed or like crumpled up paper? That's heading more towards estrus. So we wouldn't want to breed quite yet. She's still too early here. We can still see nucleuses in here, and they're not quite yet. They're not quite ready yet. But the cytoplasm is definitely more angular, and but we can still see a nucleus, so we know she's not quite ready yet. When we get into estrus, they actually look like they've been broken or shattered, and that's what we call keratinized, and they call it cornified as well. So those are cornified cells, and they've been keratinized, so they've actually lost that nucleus. They look kind of like one shade, so they don't have like that strong. There's one here that's got a little bit of a nucleus in it, but most of them just are one shade, and they're a little bit see-through. And it's you can't find a nucleus in them, and that's when we know that she's ready to breed. So if we saw something like this, we would suggest that the owner go ahead and breed. If we saw something like this, so the cytoplasm again is rounded, the nucleuses are huge. They get really big. They have really big nucleuses. And then I would say probably the biggest thing we see are neutrophils. Neutrophils, if you guys remember, are a type of white blood cells. So they're in there cleaning up this mess. If you see this, we're too late. She's already ovulated. We're not going to get this dog pregnant. It's not happening. So if you see something like this, don't even waste the owner's time. Tell them not even to waste their time breeding the dog. We've already missed her. She's going into diestrus, which means she's not going to get pregnant. Those progesterone levels have already dropped, and the eggs are no longer even ready for those. I'm having a heck of a time today, huh, guys? And then this is anestrus. So this is the if we were checking any of the females we have, most of them are spayed anyway, but they're going to look like this. There's going to be few cells, if anything. It's very clear. Obviously these are cells, but you're not going to have much on the slide to look at because the reproductive tract is sleeping, so it's not doing anything. If you were to see like a bunch of white blood cells or something on here and she's not in heat, you're likely dealing with some type of an infection. This is where we're looking for like a bunch of bacteria or something like that, and then we would know that she had an infection and she would need treated. So this just kind of shows you guys together. So estrus, so actually in heat, you guys can see there is no nucleus in this, that they're keratinized. So that's your cornified cell. So they're anuclear, so without a nucleus. And then this is early estrus, so you guys can still see that. So if it goes like where it's proestrus, early estrus, you can kind of see where the cell is starting to look. It's kind of going this way. So if you look at it that way, nucleus is less obvious, and it's gone here. So just trying to show you that these are both cornified, so they're not as angular, and these are non-cornified cells. So this is just a diestrus parabasal, very big cell, not ready to breed. So here's just a couple comparisons for you guys. So here's a proestrus, so early, mid, late, and here's diestrus. So you guys can start to see the white blood cells come in. There's diestrus again, and there's anestrus. So just see, like, basically you can kind of watch the changes in the nucleus and the change in the cells. I just wanted to give you guys something to look at, to compare to on these. I really like this chart because it shows you guys what's happening with the cells as we get into our stages. So here's our proestrus, our estrus, and our diestrus, and it's showing you here what the cells look like and kind of what's happening. So it's just, I'm giving you guys just another view just to kind of look at the cells. You guys can look at those and kind of compare them. So another way that we can find out if the female's ready to breed, and it's probably the most, actually not probably, it is the most accurate thing we can do, is what's called a progesterone test. So we're actually looking for that progesterone level, that hormone we talked about that maintains pregnancy. We want to breed the female when that progesterone level's high. So when that progesterone level is high, that's when we really want to breed that female. So they're way more precise than vaginal smears. They're commonly used. I mean, there's so many tests out there. You can do at-home kits. They have ones that are at the vet clinic that are run on machines. And serum progesterone rises before ovulation in the bitch. So we're looking for that progesterone level to make sure that the female's ready to breed. And that progesterone level is due to the LH surge. So if you remember back to those hormones, I know it's a little confusing, but that LH surge causes ovulation. It causes this progesterone to rise. And so progesterone goes up to maintain pregnancy, and that LH causes that follicle to burst, causes that egg to be released. And so that's what we're looking for here, is that progesterone levels. And it typically rises after ovulation, which is exactly what we want. We want ovulation to happen first to give that egg time to, number one, mature, and then travel down the fallopian tubes so fertilization can take place. After ovulation, the level will rise at 3 nanograms per day or more. And I realize this is like probably way over your guys' head, but I just wanted to give you the information. But we're looking for progesterone levels of 20s or even into the 30s on the day of insemination. So if we're doing any type of surgical artificial insemination, or even transvaginal or transcervical artificial insemination, we want these levels because we're putting the semen right there. We're putting it right up to where it needs to be, so it's not having to travel up everywhere from the vagina. We're putting it right to where it needs to be. We'll talk about that next week. But what we're looking for is trying to get insemination to occur at the peak fertility. There's many types. Some are color-based. Some will give you an actual number. The ones that give you an actual number are the most accurate, but they're also more expensive than the color-based tests. So basically, you're getting what you pay for. I think progesterone tests at our clinic are about $60 to run a progesterone test, but we have a machine and it gives us an exact number. Our machine's very accurate. It's one of the best ones out there. But we do a ton of reproduction. I mean, we do more C-sections than we do spays and neuters. So progesterone testing is very important to us. So like I said, we use a machine, but the blood needs to be drawn into a red top tube. So that red top tube is just a sterile tube. There's no additive in it. The blood will clot inside the tube. And we want to allow that blood to clot. We're going to let it sit for at least an hour, because that's going to allow the progesterone levels to seep into all parts of the blood and into the serum, which is what we're going to end up testing. And that's going to give us our most accurate results. We spin the tube in the centrifuge, and it separates the red blood cells and the white blood cells, and then the serum into another portion. And then we just use the serum to run the test. There are 2 videos here that you can watch. The videos, one shows you a color-based test and how it works, and the other one shows you a machine test and how it works. They're pretty short, but they're really interesting. So these are your color-based tests here. I've used both of these at the clinic, but as you can see, it's pretty, the biggest problem with these is it's so individualized on what color you think it is, and if you're at all a little bit colorblind, gentlemen more likely than ladies, this progesterone test, if it's not the same person running it every day, you're going to get a little bit skewed results, because it depends on what that person thinks. Because right across here is just showing you like the different colors it can be. And I mean, depending on the person, you might think that, like in this one, is all about is the sample darker than B but lighter than, is it lighter than B but darker than A, or is the sample darker than B but lighter than A? So it can get a little touchy. So you have to be and like depending on what the light you're in, it might look a little different. So these tests are not as accurate, but they're great for somebody if you're running it, if it's the same person running them all the time. So if you have a large breeding facility and you're running the test on the dog every day, you're going to recognize those subtle changes that where at a vet clinic when you have a staff of 40, you might not recognize. All right. Mating. We're going to talk about mating. Now, normally I collect a dog for you guys. I actually bring my husband's coon dog in here and I collect him for you guys so you can see the whole process and what happens. And it's pretty cool. When I'm at work, I collect dogs a lot. We do a ton of collections. It's very, very normal to see collections at our clinic. It's something that I used to be a little weird and now I don't even think about it. But mating occurs during estrus. So if you guys remember, estrus is the point of heat where she's acceptive to the male. Length of courtship by the male is variable. It just depends on the male himself and how long it takes him to ejaculate. And unlike in humans and horses and cows, dog ejaculation is very long. Humans, horses, and cows, it's very quick. It's a burst and it's done. Dogs' ejaculation can last anywhere from, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes to even up to a half an hour. So it takes a long time. But it starts out in actual live cover. So live cover is the male and the female actually mate. The male licks the vulva of the bitch. She's going to stand. She's going to raise that tail to one side and invite the male and say, yes, I'm interested. The male's going to mount without an erection. And he's just going to see if she's ready. And then if she stands there, then the male is going to attempt to penetrate. You're going to see that they're going to see that humping motion. That humping motion is that the male's penis looking for a spot to penetrate. Now, dogs have an os penis, which means they actually have a bone in their penis. So where humans and horses, we don't have our penises get engorged by blood. Same with horses, they get engorged by blood. They're flaccid when they're not engorged, so they just kind of hang there. Dogs' penises are not flaccid when they are, and by flaccid I mean limp or droopy. Dogs' penises are always have some rigidity to them, and that's because they actually have a bone in them. So it is possible to break that bone in the dog's penis. I've seen it done. It's not pretty. It's very, very painful for them. If you've ever heard of anybody saying that they've had their penis broken as a human, your penis can't be broke. It can get really hurt or bruised, but if something happens while it's engorged, but it can't be broken because there's no bone in it. Well, with a dog, yes, you can actually break the penis. So once the male gets the os penis in the vagina, you're really going to see that humping action. You're going to see a lot of thrusting, and that's because the bulbus glandis, which is the big part of the penis that actually gets stuck in the female, we're going to look at a picture of that in a second, engorges, and then the male will dismount and turn around. So you'll see the dog's butt to butt. That's called the tie. And that's because that bulbus glandis is actually stuck inside the female. It cannot come out. And if you do pull them apart, that can, number one, really seriously damage the male's equipment as well as the females. And it's extremely painful. So if you see two dogs tied together,